Good morning, year six. I hope you're well and have had good weekends. Um, Today's English is the beginning of a new area within our writing. We're going to be looking at some poetry. And the best way I thought we could do this was by thinking initially about the poets who wrote the poetry. The reason that the poets' own stories is so important is because these poets were writing at the time we're looking at within history in World War One, and their experiences framed a lot of the writing that they did. So it wasn't an accident that these people were young. It wasn't an accident that these people were male, because the fact they were male meant that they had gone to war. The fact they were young meant they were conscripted. They were fought. Well, they were given no choice as to whether they fought or not, whether they would have chosen to or not. These people then went to war, and their experiences framed a lot of the poetry that they delivered. And some of the poems that they wrote are still famous and still used in lots of readings now. To become familiar with them, then we're going to be successful by identifying facts within our lesson about Wilfred Owen, and then you are going to read some facts about other poets. We're going to consider why Wilfred Owen may have written the poems he wrote. We're going to read. You're going to read about some other poets, and you're going to summarise the information relating to those other three poets that I'll talk about briefly later. Okay, a bit of recall just to get us our minds in a history frame of mind about World War One. So World War One took place between 1914 and hopefully shouting the answer out. World War One was fought between the Triple Alliance, and World War One started because and what more than one soldiers, it should say, what, more than one soldier, or is it one, what, 1,000 soldiers? And okay, let's check how we got on. 1918 was when World War One finished. It was the Triple Entente which was fighting against the Triple Alliance. So the Triple Alliance was made up of Germany, Austro-Hungary, and another country that's gone out of Mr. Spring's head suddenly. The Triple Entente was France, Britain, and Russia. Okay, and Entente is quite a French word. Okay, the Triple Entente. World War One started because of an assassination in Sarajevo. If you remember, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated, and because of the alliances that then precipitated the war, more than 1 million soldiers died at the Battle of the Somme. Now, there's some words here that relate to World War One. Now, this looks quite young for a word bank, but what I thought I'd do is see. I'd really like you to try and take part in this activity. You've got this word bank within your packs today, and I'd like you, if you've got a highlighter, a couple of highlighters would be great. If you don't, if you just got a couple of pens or a pencil, if you circle any of the words, you know what they mean. And if you put a cross through any that you don't, or you put maybe a different symbol to show that you don't understand them. So, for example, I know that a rifle is a type of weapon. I know that Germany was one of the countries within the Triple Alliance. I know that trenches were the locations that soldiers slept in. This is like the Somme where they were having battles. They dug those recess points within the battlefield, and they hid from gunfire within them. I'm not sure at this point I know what an armistice is with, so I'm putting that one in a different colour. I do know what a soldier is. I know it's somebody who fights, and I think I know what a navy is. So I'm going to go through the whole word map and think, do I know what it means? Do I not know? If I do know what it means, I'm going to try and draw a little diagram. Now, as you know from my dog picture last week, Mr. Spring and little diagrams are not an ideal combination. But what I'd like you to do is to try and draw as good a diagram as you can of the language you do know, just to show you put in that work, that those language points that are going to help you understand about World War One and about the poets that wrote about it, and you're putting them in your head. So with a rifle, for example, if I was a brilliant artist, I'd draw a picture like that. I actually obviously copy and pasted it, but you get the idea. And then I draw a line using my ruler and pencil to the diagram, just to try and get me as a visual learner to understand what those language points mean. If there's words you all highlight that you don't know, like armistice, that's going to be really helpful for me when I look at the work you sent me, because that will tell me, we'll do a little bit of that, talking about that in one of our sessions. So try and have a look, guys, at which language here you do understand. I've just shown with the first row, but I'd like you to go through the whole sheet, please. Okay, so there's famous poets then. There's many famous poets. You could go into 10, 20 of them. We're going to look at four. You're going to look at four today. I'm going to read to you about one of them, and then you've got three that you need to read about. It's relatively concise, relatively short, the bits that you're reading about them, so don't worry too much about it. This one we're looking for, was born relatively close to us, Wilfred Owen. Okay, Wilfred Owen was born in Shropshire in 1883. Okay, so that's 137 years ago now. So a long time ago now, but his life finished in 1918, and that year for us should tell us something about what might have coincided with his life ending. And actually, it did. So he died just near the end of the war, but as a result of the issues within the war. Okay. So Wilfred Owen, and you can see there he's a soldier. He was a soldier within the war, and you can see him in his uniform. Um, he was always interested in poetry. It was something that he liked as a child growing up. I don't know if many of you are poets. I haven't read much poetry from you yet, but he liked poetry and he liked music. And that sometimes might have made him disinclined to be a soldier. You would think sometimes that poets or musicians might be people who didn't like elements of soldiering. However, he was actually quite keen eventually to sign up. He couldn't afford, despite liking poetry and music, he couldn't afford to go to university. Nowadays, for you, it is a challenge to afford to go to university. Mums and dads, you would have to make decisions about whether you decide it's worth it. When my sister was growing up, it was actually free to go to university and you got some money given. So it's changed a little bit over the last 15, 20 years. It changed a little bit before I went. But when Wilfred Owen was gone to university, so when he was 18, it would have been a big financial commitment that he wasn't able to make. So he couldn't afford to go. What he did, went to France. When he was in France, he taught people English. Okay, so he decided it would be interesting to go there. He was it's quite an unusual person back then because most people stayed very close to where they were located, even as the Victorian time was coming to an end. So when he was in 1902 going to France, he was still quite young, but he was ready to go over there to explore and to see the world. He was living in France, so in 1914 when the war broke out. So he'd been there for quite a few years, for about 10 years, and he'd been living there, and the war broke out. Now he'd go back to England. He'd go back to England and he'd volunteer to fight. He wasn't somebody called a conscript. He was somebody who volunteered to fight. He thought it was the right thing to do. Okay, there's some quotations from Wilfred Owen here. Um, the people of England needn't hope; they must agitate. And agitate means to get up to fight. I do now most intensely want to fight. He wanted to fight. So this is before his sign up. I hate washy pacifists, and we're showing here how he feels about the people that he could uh, that he didn't like. So washy pacifists. So we'll look at the word pacifist in a second. This is what he's saying before he went away to fight, before he'd signed up to fight, before he volunteered, put his hand up and said, "I want to volunteer." So pacifist, then, this word, it means a person who believes that war and violence is unjustifiable. So it doesn't think there's any way it's okay to fight. And remember, Wilfred Owen said, I hate washy pacifists. I hate them. Stems pacifist from pacifus, which means somebody who's peacemaking. Again, that Latin coming through like a binomial system within Carl Linnaeus. Latin pacifius means to be peaceful, peacemaking. An image of a pacifist, there's different ones here. These are from the 1960s and 70s in America. So in America in the 1960s, there was a lot of people campaigning against a war that took place in Southeast Asia, where American soldiers went and fought against people from other countries there. And the signs people used were things like this circle with these lines across, which could, and the bomb sign. Sometimes people would make this sign, which means peace. There are also other representations of pacifists like this. Sometimes pacifists are negatively perceived, so they'd be called maybe a conscientious objector. And you can see that the hat on the person on the right hand side, and the idea is they're not very good at defending a country. So this picture would have been from the First World War, saying that a conscientious objector, which is a synonym for a pacifist, wouldn't help you, and that the Germans, who are the ones on the left with the bayonet, would be able to attack a conscientious objector. So they wouldn't help you. It's fine having a conscience, but it shows you're weak. So different people have different perceptions of what a pacifist is, whether they're a positive thing or a negative thing. Synonyms then, you might say appeaser. You might say somebody who appeases, lets people get away with things. A conscientious objector as well, like that poster had. Then the antonyms, the opposite would be an antagonist or a combatant. So people who fight, okay, or a soldier. Then we've got this idea of a usage. So we've got the idea Sammy hated pacifists, feeling they'd allow his land to be conquered. So sometimes people really resent pacifists because they perceive that they let one combatant overcome another one without a fight that they should expect to endure. Okay, I'm just going to move my face up because I think some of you actually follow my lips rather than my words. Okay, so pacifist. And remember, the reason we looked at that word was because Wilfred Owen, before he joined up, said he hated washy pacifists. Okay. So now we go through and he joined up with a soldier. And as we look through, what do you think those statements show about his feeling regarding the war? and make sure you explain your answers. So what I'd like you to do, first of all, now is pause the video. What do those statements there about washy pacifist show about how he perceived people? Pause the video there while you do that, please. Carrying on now, we're going to find out more about Wilfred Owen as his life carried on. So he was sent to the battlefield in 1916. So at this point, I think he's about about 33 years old, as he was born in 1883. As he goes there, he was sent to the Somme sector to begin with, and then to the Hindenburg lines. These are different areas within the battlefield in France. A shell exploded. So that's a kind of bomb exploded near him and left him severely shell shocked. Now, shell shock doesn't mean his ears were hurting necessarily. It doesn't mean his eyes were hurting. It almost means his mind and his brain were hurting. It means you're really scared, maybe. There's different ways it manifests itself. We might call it now post-traumatic stress disorder. It's when something terrible happens to you, something very shocking happens to you, and it affects you and how you react to other things going forward. Because of this, he was sent back to England to recover. When he got back to England, he started to think more about the war. Based on his experience, his views changed, and he became very critical of people called armchair patriots. Now, an armchair patriot might be somebody like this. You see the picture here? It's somebody who's saying who's absent. So this person who's got time to eat a lot of food, so you can see they've got a big tummy, and they might be also sat in their armchair. And these armchair patriots are people who might say it's important you go and fight, but actually, are they doing the fighting? They're sat in their armchair saying, "Go and fight, young man," but they're not actually doing the fighting themselves. And sometimes he got very critical of armchair patriots. Wilfred Owen then, as he came back, he wrote these poems: mental cases, anthem for doomed youth, disabled, futility, insensibility. And if you look at the titles of those poems, we will look at another one of his poems that's even more famous. What do they suggest? What do you think they suggest had happened to him? Does he still sound like he was he hated washy pacifist, or does he now sound like he doesn't like people who are proposing that people go to war? I'd like you to read those titles again: mental cases, anthem for doomed youth, disabled, futility, insensibility, and then write down what you think had happened to him now. Pause the video while you do that, please. Okay, guys, and then carrying on. So treated for shell shock. It wasn't something that people thought was acceptable back then. It was he would go to somewhere called a hospital, but it wasn't necessarily a hospital full of kindness. It was a hospital where he might almost be punished. And really sad people who were tormented, really hurt by their experiences, and people screaming because they were so sad about what they remembered. They were really anxious, really worried. They'd maybe see things that weren't there. They'd hallucinate, and their bodies and their minds might appear to be unsettled. Once he got better from his shell shock, he was sent away, and he was killed 1 week before the war ended. And there's quite a lot of memorials to him in lots of places due to his poetry. The day the war ended was the 11th of November. That's why we have Armistice Day on the 11th of November every year. And that's the day his family found out that he died. Now you're going to think about those poems, the other poets as well. You're going to read about the additional poets, so the three additional poets, and then you're going to write 5 facts about each of the poets. We've got Wilfred Owen, Siegfried Sassoon, Rupert Brooke, and John Munro. Now, the Siegfried Sassoon and Rupert Brooke passages are quite short. The John Munro McCrae one, sorry, is a bit longer, but I think you should be able to do it. And your writing for this is just some summaries. You can see where I've done the Wilfred Owen one for you. It says when he joined up, it says when he was sent to France, what happened to him, when he died. And then I also wrote a poetry fact in there about him. And I think you should be able to elicit a poetry fact for each of our other three poets and put that in your summary package. We're going to look at their poems this week, but today I just thought it'd be good if you got familiar with the poets themselves. Thank you for your attention. I hope you take this topic seriously. It's really important we understand about the origins of these poems. Thank you, guys. Just again, word bank to begin with, feeling, and then that completed summary sheet, please. Okay, guys.